Welcome. Today I'm going to be showing you how I did various elements of this card. I'm calling this a vintage distressed card. There's some generational stamping, some ink blending, some distressing. So stick around and I'll show you how this all came together. Okay, for our main part of the image, I am using the outline flower stamp from the Fragrant Layers set. That's this big stamp right here. I used that earlier this week on a stamp, so I'm going to show you how I used that. And I'm going to grab my pecan pie ink, and I have a panel of Very Vanilla cardstock. So first thing I did, I wanted to have a little bit of, I wanted to kind of enhance the background, kind of make my own background for this particular card. So what I did was, let me actually leave that down. I'm going to ink my stamp up completely with that pecan pie. And then I'm going to stamp off. So if you're not familiar with stamping off, that means you ink your stamp completely and then on a piece of scratch paper stamp it. That's stamping off once. And then if you stamp it again, that's considered the second generation stamp. You can even try to stamp it a third time. That would be a third generation stamp. So you can really get a lot of mileage out of one stamp and one ink pad if you start doing some of this kind of stamping off and using the various generations. Okay, so I just flip my scratch paper over and we're going to get started here. I'm going to use the third generation stamp on this card. So I'm going to stamp once, stamp a second time, and I think I'll go this way, just kind of off the corner, stamp that third generation stamp so it's nice and faded. And then I'm going to ink up again. Anytime I'm doing kind of this type of a background, I like to do opposite corners. So typically it's the top left and bottom right. So stamp once, stamp twice, and third generation onto the card. Okay. And then I think the next thing we're going to do is I took a stencil and did a little bit of stenciling over the top of where I stamped. This is a really old stencil that I've had in my stash probably for just 15 years or so. It's kind of a Moroccan style, so look through your stash, see if you have some kind of a stencil you can use. I'm going to be using pecan pie again and a little blending brush. Pick up a little bit of ink on that, and then I'm just really lightly going to start blending, and I want it to kind of fade out toward the bottom of the card. So I'm going to start up here just real light. Oop. I'm going to hold on to it so it doesn't move, and then just kind of let it fade out. And maybe without re-inking, come back up to the top and kind of make my way back down a little bit. I'm going to hold on tight, and I am going to just kind of lift this and see where I'm at. And I like how that looks. I'm going to stop. I don't want any more. I really want it pretty faded, not too noticeable. And I'll do the same thing down here in the bottom corner. And some of that is going to be covered up, but that's okay. And I'm going to just bring that up if I can get a hold of it. Bring that up to the camera. I really like how it just really fades out there. All right. And then I think the next step we're going to do is that main image. So I'm taking that outline stamp again. This time I'm going to stamp it full strength right in the middle of the card. Okay. And I mean, you could even just leave it like that. I think that looks pretty cool having, it just all blends together because you've used the same stamp. It's more faded though, so it doesn't show up as much. And then your main image on top. Now we're going to do the same type of generational stamping for the color that's in this stamp. And if you haven't seen this stamp set, it does come with a whole entire stamp that fills in the color of the flowers. So I'm going to just ink this up. I'm using Calypso Coral today, and on its own, or full strength, I guess I should say, full strength Calypso Coral is pretty bright. And I knew that I didn't really want bright. I kind of wanted more faded and subtle colors for this card. I'm going to scoot that over there so we can do our stamping off over here. So I'll show you what that looks like. There's the first stamp that's really intense. There's the second. There's if I were to do a third. Let's go ahead and get that inked up again. Stamp off once. And then just kind of get this lined up the best we can. There we go. Okay. The next thing I am going to do, actually I should have left my pecan pie out. I want to do the centers of these flowers, and for that I used pecan pie and I did stamp off. So I'm going to leave my scratch paper off to the side here. And I'll show you again. There's full strength, second generation, third generation. So I am going to do third generation. Actually, I'll do second generation. So stamp off once, stamp off once, and stamp off once. That just gives a little bit of a tan color to the centers of those flowers. Okay, and then we'll fill in the leaves also. I used Lost Lagoon for that, and I again did not do full strength. So let's grab some leaves. Let's see, get a blank corner in here. And this stamp set does come with 3 different leaf stamps. So you just have to kind of look and figure out which one it lines up with. We'll ink this first one up in Lost Lagoon, and we'll do some generation stamping here. There's full strength, there's second, there's third. Okay, I'm going to do second generation for this one. So stamp once and stamp again. All right. And just as quick as that, our whole entire main part of the image part of our card is done. The next thing I'm going to show you is how I did some of these different little branch pieces over here. All right, so I did a little bit of die cutting before we started here, and I'm going to show you where these came from. I did some mixing and matching of sets. These did not all come from the Fragrant Layers. This little flower did. That comes with the Fragrant Layers bundle or die set. So, you know, if you have the die set, that's this little flower right here. If you don't have the die set, you know, look around your stash. I'm sure you can find something small that can be tucked into your card, into that cluster on the front. If you like this idea, but that's the only die you want, I'm sure you have something in your stash you could use. This little branch, I wanted something that just looked kind of like a twig almost. I found that in my Thoughtful Wishes stamp set and dies. So that came from here. Actually, I pulled the die so I could show it. That's this die right here. And then this one comes from the Perfectly Pairs die set. That was this one out of there. So, you know, like I said, I'm sure that somewhere in your stash you have various branches and leaves and flowers, different things like that that you could use for a technique like this. So I cut these out in Very Vanilla because I wanted to be able to color them, you know, how I wanted, basically. Instead of cutting these out of solid cardstock, I wanted to be able to kind of control how much color they had or how much ink they had. So I'm going to start with this big one from the Perfectly Pairs set, and I have my blending brush and Lost Lagoon. I'm going to grab a little bit of ink, and you kind of have to hang on tight. Now I know how I'm going to have this on my card. This part down here is going to be tucked in, so it's not going to be seen. So I'm going to hang on there. And these can be kind of delicate, so just be careful that you don't rip them. And I'm just going to start real lightly doing some ink blending. You might have to move your fingers around. Just try to be careful to not, you know, if you have a lot of ink on there, you could smudge it or get a fingerprint in it, but... And then just as light or as dark as you want. I probably got a little bit more ink on there than I did before, but that's okay. Just gives it a little bit of color. It'll now kind of match that, the Lost Lagoon colors on the main part of our card. So I'm going to set that aside. And I'm going to grab this little kind of twig looking one and use the pecan pie on that. And just kind of that same concept, just doing a little bit of blending. Again, you can go as light or as dark as you want. I like to kind of do light down at the bottom and fade up, or darker at the bottom and fade up to lighter. And I'm going to stop there, just keep it kind of subtle. And then this third die, I'm actually just going to leave it vanilla. I'm not going to put any color on that one at all. Okay, the next couple steps we're going to do are the sentiment and this little thing back here that looks like a postage stamp. Now, I'd be curious if any of you have that stamp in your stash. I'm doing a little bit of stash busting, and I'm using this Fresh Vintage Celebration set from 2011. So this is almost 14 years old. I'm using this little stamp right here that looks like, or the stamp that looks like a postage stamp. And then I'm pairing that with this little punch that looks like a postage stamp with Shelley's signature on it. I'd be curious if anybody still has this. I think some people are selling it out there on various websites, but you know, certainly it's not available on Stampin' Up! Anymore. So again, this is one of those things, dig into your stash, look in your closets and your stamp cupboard, or wherever you keep your things, see what you can come up with. I'd be curious to see, you know, you do a little bit of stash busting. I'd love to see you share that. Tag me on your social media if you do that. Okay, so let's stamp our sentiment. Now I am using the Thinking of You sentiment out of the Friendly Foliage set. This one right here. I liked the font of that. It's just a really pretty font, I think, and I think it goes well with this style. And I'm just going to stamp it onto a piece of Very Vanilla. Okay, so we'll do that. And then here is that little postage stamp. I have some Lost Lagoon here, and I am again going to stamp it off just like we've done with a lot of other things. If you're wanting to try this technique, I urge you just to practice. Grab a piece of scratch paper and start playing with different colors and you know, different stamps, different colors, see how they turn out, see what you like and don't like. Experiment. That's part of the fun, I think. Okay, and then I'm going to use that little punch to stamp that out. Actually, before I do that, I did one extra thing. I almost forgot on our sample. I did use the little flower stamp from the not Friendly Foliage. From this Fragrant Layers set, I used this little flower stamp outline, and I did just a little bit of detail with the pecan pie onto the front of this, just to kind of tie everything together. So again, I'm going to be doing some generation stamping. I think I'll do third generation. So 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. It's very, very subtle, but it adds a little bit of detail. And again, like I said, it kind of pulls everything together with that same flower design. And then we'll just line this up and punch. So cute. I love that little stamp. So all of our pieces are starting to come together here. I have just a few more tips and techniques for doing a kind of a distressed look on your cards to show you. So what I'm going to do actually on the sentiment, I'm going to just use a pair of scissors to cut this out because it does not need to be fancy. I'm going to really rough it up. So I'm just making this the size I want. I don't want it too big. Let's see, maybe something like that. And then when there's a couple different ways you can kind of distress the edge of something. A lot of people will use scissors, and I do that occasionally. You can kind of rub your scissors blade across the edge and you kind of get that frayed look. For me, I get a lot, it does this. It kind of get a lot of that paper dust flying around. I actually really like to use something more like a metal spatula and kind of use that, perpendicular. I still get a little bit of the paper dust, but not as much, I feel like. And it also kind of helps curl and curve the edges when that's the look I'm going for. So just kind of go all the way around and I am trying to kind of be rough with it. I want to, kind of rough it up, kind of damage it a little bit. It goes along with that distressed look. Kind of crinkle the edges a little bit and curl it. And then a lot of times I will take some ink and go around the edges also. So I'm if there's anything left on my brush, I'm kind of brushing it on there. I'll leave that for now. We'll come back to that. Another element that I have on the front of the card as part of my layering piece is this little kind of label punch. This is actually going to be the panel behind my main layer. So the middle won't be shown. So I'm going to just punch my label out of the middle. And we'll come back to this piece in just a second. But for this, I did the same thing. I did the roughing up, but I actually did a little bit of stamping with this flower also. Almost forgot about that. So we'll get our pecan pie back out. And again, I'm going to stamp off. Just grab this little piece of Very Vanilla that I have sitting here. Now this is really going to be hidden, so not much of it's going to be seen. I did a couple kind of tone-on-tone stamps. This is pecan pie cardstock. I forgot to mention that, with pecan pie ink. So for this piece, I'm actually going to rip the side. So that's another kind of a distress technique you can use. And I am going to ink up the edges. Just kind of quick go around with your brush. This could be with like a foam. One of those foam daubers, or any kind of blending brush. Again, I'm going to just kind of rough the edges. And do a little crinkling just to make it look a little old and distressed. Okay, another piece of our puzzle coming together here. And last but not least is this outer layering piece. And again, I just used my spatula to kind of rough up the edges. So I just went all the way around, depending on like how roughed up you want it. You can really, really get after it. You can, kind of rip parts of it and have it curl down, things like that. I'm not going to do the whole thing right now on camera, but that's basically the gist. Just kind of hold your whatever tool you're using and go kind of perpendicular to your piece and just let it really get roughed up. Okay. And the last element that we'll kind of put together here is this frame. And I showed this on my last video how I did that. I'm using the Everyday Arches dies, and I'm using 2 of them. So it's actually the 4th and 5th sizes from the largest. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you put them together on your cardstock, making sure that they're evenly spaced, you'll kind of look all the way around between the 2 and run that through your die cutting machine. You're going to end up with both that inside panel, which you'll save for a different project, but also a really neat little frame that you can use. So what I decided to do was actually kind of make this into more of like a 3D element. So I don't know if you can see, I cut this in the Lost Lagoon and then 3 in Very Vanilla and glued them all together. So it made a kind of a nice thick frame on there. So just kind of show you what I have. I have 3 Very Vanillas and my Lost Lagoon. And I'm just going to run a little bead of glue, stack them together and let them dry, and we'll end up with our little frame element. Since I was going to say, if you saw my last video, you'll see how I did this, but I actually didn't double or triple stack anything. So I just ran a thin bead of glue all the way around one of these frames, and I'm going to just lay the other one on top, directly on top, and just kind of start sandwiching them together. Get my tweezer out of the way here. They're very easy to get lined up. And then once they're together, I like to hold on to it with the tweezer and then just run some glue around. I'll have to add a little bit of glue down at the bottom here. But then what I'm going to do is just put one of my heavy acrylic blocks on the top of this to hold it down for a couple minutes, and that'll help make it all stick together. All right, and before we start assembling, the last thing I'm going to show you that I have here is this ribbon. It's called Irregular Weave Trim from Stampin' Up. It is so cool. Just something new and different, and I'm just using a small chunk of this, and I kind of tucked it in to the side over here. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but let's start putting the rest of this together. So I'm just going to use a little bit of tape runner on the back of my main image and put that onto our pecan pie distressed piece. Okay, and then we'll glue this frame onto the top. And I want it to just frame my flowers pretty well. Just hold that down a little bit. Okay, and then I'm using quite a few different dimensionals on this. So I'm gonna, to put this little piece of this label on, I'm gonna put 1 dimensional, and that's gonna come kind of off to the side here. And I'm not putting anything over here because of that frame sticking up. That's holding it up. And I just realized that over on this one, I actually used crumb cake for my label, but that's totally okay. That's, you know, you can totally change things up. So we have pecan pie over here now. Okay, let's see. Next is going to be, I'm going to tuck these little branches in last. And I did not do any inking on the edges of this, and I had on the other one, so if there's anything left on my brush, it can ink those edges. Okay, now we'll put 1 dimensional on the back of this stamp and have it kind of right there. And I think we'll do the sentiment next. And again, let me see how many I used on the last one. I used a couple side by side, just kind of right here in the middle, and the rest is hanging off, which is totally okay. Okay, now we're going to grab the glue, and then you have to just kind of start fitting pieces in. So I kind of like how this one is here. Actually, I want my branch to go in behind it, so maybe if these don't go tuck in as far as you want, you can always clip them, you know, cut the bottoms of them so that you have room. I didn't put anything in the way down there apparently, so these are going in just fine. I think what I will do is put a little glue on both the front and back, because I'm not entirely sure how much is going to grab or what it's going to grab onto back there. I'll do the same on this. Just a very skinny piece. I think I'll do this leaf too. And then we can always add a little more glue later once everything's, you know, kind of in place and arranged. I like those just kind of over the top of each other. And then I'm going to put a little glue on this flower, just kind of the bottom, maybe a couple of these petals. And tuck that in. Okay, and then last but not least is our little piece of trim. And let's see. I don't want too much sticking out, so maybe we'll do about this much. Actually, I'm going to cut that a little shorter even. So it's really like maybe 2 inches. Okay. It's, with it being that weave, the glue could go straight through it, but we'll take our chances here. All right. And that is it. That is our distressed vintage card. I will mount this onto a very vanilla card base. I haven't done that yet, but I hope that you were able to pick up a few different little tips and tricks on adding some, you know, design elements and distressing to your cards, to your backgrounds, to some of the different little embellishments and design pieces. So thank you so much for joining me today, and have a great rest of your day.